Hello, dear friends. This story, the writing, voice, and visuals, was made just for this channel. It's 100% original and created to help you unwind and get lost in something real. Let's begin. Part 1. Helen Ashcroft's story begins. My name is Helen Ashcroft. I'm 66 years old, and I've lived most of my life playing by everyone else's rules. Quiet when expected, gracious when it hurt, and polite even when they tried to cut me down with their smug little smiles. My late husband, Richard, used to say I had a talent for endurance, like I was a piece of antique furniture that somehow kept holding up. Maybe that was true, but no one ever asked what happens when something old and strong finally decides it's had enough. The day of Richard's will reading was cold and gray, but not in the poetic, moody way, just dull, like the air itself had grown tired of us. I arrived wearing burgundy, the same jacket I wore the day we opened the foundation's headquarters. It still fit, and I knew the color made me look composed, not grieving. I wasn't there to put on a show of tears for anyone, especially not for Meredith, my daughter-in-law. She never liked me, not even when she needed something. She married my son Peter when they were both young and stupid, but she stayed long enough to learn how to wear ambition like perfume, light enough to seem elegant, heavy enough to choke a room when she walked in. When she greeted me that day, her voice was dripping in syrup, all smiles and "Helen, you look well." But her eyes, they were already scanning the room like a vulture looking for bones. Peter barely looked up. He used to be my boy, sensitive, bright, always wanting to do right. But Meredith got to him fast, polished him down like a river stone until he didn't have edges of his own anymore. He sat beside her, hand folded over hers like a man posing for a family portrait. Not one morning his father, the lawyer, cleared his throat. There were only 7 of us in the room, but his tone had the stiffness of someone addressing a courtroom. As executor of the estate of Richard L. Ashcroft, I'll begin with the preliminary notes of distribution. Meredith straightened in her seat. She had that look, the one she wore when waiting for the dessert tray at a gala. She was so sure she'd won already. Richard had money, not vast billionaire money, but old, well-managed Ashcroft money, land, property, to trust portfolios, and that miserable ranch in Wyoming that everyone hated visiting but he kept out of sheer spite for Hoa developments. Meredith never once stepped foot on that ranch, but she always brought it up with a wrinkle in her nose. The property could be converted, she'd say. Something more, boutique. She meant demolished. Of course. I could see it all playing in her head as the lawyer read through the formalities. The shopping, the redesign, the smug Instagram captions from what she'd call our legacy home. And then came the line, the one I knew would come. To my beloved wife, Helen Ashcroft, I leave the ranch property in full. A pause. Meredith blinked. Her lips parted like she couldn't quite process it. Then, and I swear to you, not a moment of hesitation, she laughed, loud enough to fill the room, sharp enough to draw eyes. Oh, come on, she scoffed, glancing around like someone would join her. Let her keep that pile of splinters. It suits her. Then she leaned in toward me and smiled with all her teeth. Take your wrinkles and go, she whispered. That place is all yours now, Grandma. She even patted my hand, as if I were some relic being gently dismissed. I didn't flinch, didn't blink. I'd been insulted by better people in my time. The lawyer waited for silence, eyes flicking between us like he was debating whether to intervene. Then he cleared his throat again, a little louder this time. There is a second envelope. That stopped her laughter cold. The room went still. Not dramatic still, but deeply uncomfortable. You could hear Peter shift in his chair. Even Meredith's fingers stopped drumming. It's dated 3 months after the initial version, the liar said. Mr. Ashcroft requested it be opened only after the main directives were read aloud. He pulled a slim, cream-colored envelope from a separate folder and held it like it might bite. It had Richard's handwriting on the front. Not a label, just 2 words. Read this. For the first time that day, Meredith's smile cracked. Just a little, but I saw it. And I knew. Whatever was inside that envelope, it wasn't for her. Not this time. Not anymore. The liar peeled the seal open like it was something sacred, slow and exact, like Richard had warned him not to rush. I watched Meredith from the corner of my eye. Her fingers had stopped moving, her nails digging just slightly into Peter's arm. She didn't blink. She didn't speak. She waited, and that was new for her. The liar unfolded a single sheet, thicker than standard paper, cream-colored and weighted like it belonged in an archive. No logo, no notary stamp, just Richard's handwriting in firm, blue ink. I recognized the pen. It used to sit on his desk, always refilled, always placed parallel to the edge. If you're reading this, Helen is sitting in that room, and I'm not. And if Helen is sitting there, she already knows what's coming. She always saw farther than the rest of us. Meredith gave a short exhale through her nose, a scoff. Without commitment. I wrote this after the diagnosis. I was supposed to have more time. I didn't. And for once in my life, I didn't want someone else cleaning up the mess I left behind. I felt something tighten in my chest. Richard never said sorry outright, but this was his version of kneeling. To my son, Peter, I love you, but I watched you become a stranger in your own home. I saw what fear turned you into, and what Meredith encouraged. I tried to tell you. You stopped listening. Maybe this will get through. Peter didn't lift his head. His lips were moving, barely. Maybe counting, maybe praying. To Meredith, I heard what you said. At the hospital, you thought I was asleep. I wasn't. You said Helen was just waiting for me to die so she could play queen. You said she looked like a relic from a failed dynasty. You said, let her have the ranch. Maybe she'll go there to die quietly. Meredith's head jerked sideways. That's not what I said. But the liar held up his hand, kept reading. You thought I was too far gone to hear. I wasn't. And you showed your true colors, shallow, cold, and calculating. So here's my decision. The ranch is Helen's. Not just the deed. Everything beneath it, round it, and tied to it. The land rights, the mineral rights, the contracts you never asked about because you thought it was just dirt. The room cracked, not audibly, emotionally. Meredith shifted, just once, then stood. This is absurd. He was sick. You can't possibly think. Sit, I said. Quiet. Even. She stopped, not because I was loud, but because I wasn't. There's more, the liar said. He asked me to give this directly to Helen. He reached into the folder and pulled out a small black envelope, sealed with red wax. My heart didn't race. It slowed, because I knew that seal. I hadn't seen it in 43 years. Not since before Peter was born. Not since before the affair. Not since the first time I almost left. My fingers closed around the envelope, like they belonged to someone else. I didn't open it. Not yet. I felt the weight of it. Heavy, like a stone soaked in secrets. I looked at Meredith. whose mouth was slightly open now. Not angry, not mocking, just confused. And then I looked at Peter, and for a second, just one, I saw my boy, not her husband, not her defender. Mine? The boy who used to draw maps and hide cookies in my coat pocket. And that made me angrier than anything else. Because somewhere, in all this, they'd taken him too. I stood, not rushed, just tall, steady. I held the black envelope in my hand and looked around the room, slow and clear. "Thank you," I said to the lawyer. "We're done here." Meredith's mouth opened again, but nothing came out. Peter blinked like a man surfacing from deep water. I didn't wait for them to argue. I turned, walked out, and felt every eye following me. I didn't look back, because I didn't need to see their faces. I already knew. I'd finally become something none of them knew how to handle. A woman who'd stopped forgiving. Helen didn't cry. She didn't argue. She just stood up and walked out, holding that black envelope, like it weighed more than the house behind her. But what her family didn't know was that this wasn't the only thing Richard had left behind. In part 2, we find out exactly what was written inside, and why Meredith should have stayed quiet. Part 2. The letter Richard never meant for anyone else to read. The envelope lay in my lap like a sealed confession. Black paper. Red wax. It looked like something out of a different century. Richard had always been drawn to drama, but this felt different. It wasn't for show. It wasn't for the family. It was for me. The car was silent as the driver pulled away from the estate. I'd asked for a private exit, and thankfully the lawyer respected that. I didn't want to see Meredith's face again. Not today. I didn't want to hear her try to twist it all into something she could still benefit from. And I didn't want to see Peter's eyes. Not after what I'd felt in that room. For a moment, I saw him. Really saw him. And then it vanished. Like everything else that used to be mine. I waited until we were halfway down the ridge road before I broke the wax. It cracked clean, like it had been waiting for me to do it. The paper inside was folded twice. No envelope lining, no dates, no signature at the top, just his handwriting. The first line stopped me cold. "Helen, if you're holding this, it means I ran out of time again." I stared at it. Let the word settle. Ran out of time again. As if that had always been his problem. Not decisions, not avoidance, just time. The next lines were messier, more rushed. As if written late at night or with trembling hands. "I never knew how to say things when it mattered. I thought you'd wait forever. That you'd always be just down the hall, brushing your hair or humming something you didn't realize I could hear. I thought we had time to fix the silences between us. I thought I could make things right without saying the ugly parts aloud. But you deserved ugly truths, not polished apologies." I swallowed, hard. My throat burned in a way I hadn't felt since the year after the affair. He had sworn he'd never speak of it again. And he hadn't. Until now. The ranch wasn't a punishment. I know how you saw it. The exile house. The go away and be still property. I let them think that too. But I bought that land the year after we almost ended. I went there alone, and I cried in that damn shed with the rotten roof and the termites. I buried something there. Not money, not gold, something else. I'll tell you where. And when you find it, you'll understand what I never had the courage to say to your face. My hand trembled now, not because I was scared, but because he had buried something, and I had no idea what that meant. Not yet. The letter continued. Meredith tried to convince me to sell it. She came to me with documents, contacts, some real estate nonsense about developers and mineral rights. But I knew what she wanted. She wanted it erased. So I couldn't tell you. So you'd never go there again. I leaned back against the seat, letting my head rest against the leather. The windows blurred slightly. Not from rain, from memory. I could see her in the garden that summer. The way she cut flowers without asking whose they were. The way she rearranged everything in my kitchen and called it helping. And now she'd tried to erase this too. I never stopped loving you, even when I was a coward. Even when I said nothing, you stayed. That's what makes you dangerous to them now. You know the whole story. I folded the letter, not because I was done, but because I wasn't ready to read the last lines. The car pulled into the private entrance of my house, far from the estate. I didn't even wait for the driver. I stepped out, went straight to the back garden, sat at the wrought iron table under the magnolia tree, and stared at the letter again. The final lines were written in thicker strokes. Maybe the pen had been running out. Maybe his hand had steadied for just a second. The tree with the burn mark. Go there. Dig where the roots split. Bring gloves. It's not heavy, but it is sharp. I stared at that last word. Sharp. What the hell did that mean? Something metal? A letter opener? A weapon? I sat in that garden until the wind picked up. Until the pages started to flutter again. Until I realized I'd spent 40 years in the quiet shadow of a man who'd finally found the courage to speak. Only after he was gone. But I wasn't crying. I wasn't broken. I was awake. And I was done being the family relic they thought would just sit and fade. Tomorrow, I would drive to the ranch. And I would dig. Not because I needed closure, but because whatever Richard buried there wasn't going to stay hidden anymore. ChatGPT. The next morning was colder than I expected, not in temperature, in feeling, the kind of morning where silence clings to the air and even the birds seem to wait before breaking it. I stood in the doorway of my house for a long time, watching the frost lift off the garden wall, still holding Richard's letter like it might vanish if I left it unattended. I didn't call anyone, didn't leave a note. I took the keys to the old SUV Richard used for driving out to the ranch. He'd kept it in a private garage, well-maintained and gassed up as if he'd known I'd need it one day. The drive was long and winding, familiar, but distant, like visiting a place from a dream. The trees leaned in the way they always had, and the hills opened up just past the bluff. I passed the rusted Ashcroft sign half buried in dry grass. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. I just drove. The ranch looked exactly as I remembered it, right down to the way the porch sagged slightly on the left. There were no lights, no birds, no motion at all. Just the wind scraping gently at the wooden siding and the faint creak of the old weather vane. Spinning with no direction. I stepped out of the car and inhaled deeply. Dirt, wood, cold, and something old in the air. Not decay, but memory. I walked slowly past the house and into the backfield, my boots crunching in the dry grass. I hadn't brought anyone with me. No one even knew I was out here. I wanted it that way. Richard said. The tree with the burn mark. I knew it instantly. The old split oak. About 20 yards past the barn, where lightning had struck 15 years ago and singed one whole side of the trunk. It had never died. It had grown in spite of it, the char running through the bark like a scar. I knelt by the roots. The ground was drier than I expected, hard-packed but cracked enough to break apart. I brought gloves, like he told me, and a small hand spade. I started digging, slow, steady, methodical. until my hand hit something not stone, not wood, metal, but not heavy. I cleared away the dirt with shaking fingers. There was a box. A long, flat, rust-dark box with a brass latch. I sat back on my heels for a moment and just stared at it. It was cold in my hands when I lifted it. I could hear my own breath loud in my ears. The latch opened easily. Inside was not what I expected. A stack of envelopes, sealed, each labeled with names. Peter, Meredith, me, and one more, Caroline. I froze. Caroline Ashcroft, our daughter, the one we lost when she was 2. A name we stopped speaking after the funeral because we couldn't say it without collapsing. There hadn't been letters. Not then. Not ever. I picked up the envelope with her name. It was thinner than the rest, but it looked newer, less faded, and behind it, a small photo, folded, of the 4 of us, me, Richard, Peter, and Caroline. On that porch, the one behind me now. It wasn't a copy I remembered. It had her handwriting on the back. In pencil. Just one word. Home? I covered my mouth. My hands shook harder than they had in decades. I wasn't prepared for this. Richard had kept this, hidden this, buried this, like a secret too sharp to name. And he'd brought her here, not in body, but in memory, preserved in letters, a place only he and I would recognize. I set the Caroline envelope aside and reached for mine. I almost couldn't open it, but I did. You were right. I should have let you grieve the way you needed to. I should have cried with you instead of beside you. I should have taken you back to the porch that day, not let you go alone. I watched you fold in on yourself, and I let you, because I didn't know how to hold your pain without being swallowed by it. So I did the one thing I thought might be worthy of her. I built this place with silence, and I waited until I could speak again. My eyes blurred, not from tears, from everything coming up at once. 40 years of weight I didn't know I was still carrying. I held the letter to my chest, then laid it beside the others. I didn't read Peter's or Meredith's. Not yet. This place, it wasn't just land. It was Richard's apology, Richard's grave, Richard's confessional. He hadn't left it for them. He'd left it for me. And for her. I sat in the field, next to the old box. As the sun began its slow slide west, I didn't speak. I didn't move. I just sat with them. All of them. In the quiet place he built for truth. I stayed at the ranch that night. I didn't tell anyone I'd arrived. Didn't call. Didn't text. The house still had power. Barely. And I lit one of the emergency lanterns. Richard kept in the kitchen drawer. The floors creaked the same way they did 30 years ago, as if the house itself remembered every argument, every silence, every time we left something unsaid. I didn't open Meredith's letter. I didn't need to yet. Let her sit with her questions. Let her wonder what he might have told me, what he might have admitted. For the first time in years, the not knowing felt like power, like armor. Peter's envelope felt heavier, and I couldn't tell if it was guilt, or regret, or something else entirely. I ran my fingers across his name. It was written in softer strokes. Not angry, just tired. I left it on the table and went out onto the porch. The photo of Caroline still in my hand. The stars out there always looked closer, like you could touch them if you leaned far enough over the railing. Richard used to say that God built Wyoming with extra space for thoughts to speak. I hated when he said that, but tonight it didn't sound so stupid. I closed my eyes and listened. Not for coyotes, Not for wind, but for memory. For her laugh. For his boots on the steps. For my own voice, younger, braver, still hoping. And then I opened my eyes and whispered her name out loud for the first time in decades. Caroline. The word didn't break me. It steadied me. As if the land, this strange, silent land he bought out of guilt, had finally earned its peace. I didn't sleep much that night. I sat up reading and rereading the letter, trying to trace between the lines all the things he couldn't say with a pen. The man who never apologized had buried his apology in a box, under a scarred tree, with the memory of a daughter we both lost in different ways. And I, the woman they all thought too tired to matter, had found it. I didn't feel old that night. I didn't feel angry, either. I felt ready, not to forgive, but to finish what he couldn't. In the morning, I would call the lawyer. I'd give him my instructions about the letters, about the ranch, about the real terms of my silence, and how much it was about to cost them. Because Meredith hadn't just insulted a widow. She had underestimated a historian of pain. And Peter, my sweet boy, he had some things to remember too. Not just about Richard, but about me. And I would make sure he remembered. She read the letters, but she didn't cry. She didn't break. She simply stood on that porch, holding a photo that the rest of the family pretended didn't exist. And when the sun came up, Helen Ashcroft wasn't just a widow anymore. In part 3, she returns to the city, and this time, she's not leaving quietly. Part 3, Helen comes back to town. When I returned, I didn't go straight home. I drove past my house, past the street where Peter grew up, past the bakery Meredith always pretended to support but never bought a damn thing from. I parked 2 blocks from the lawyer's office and walked the rest of the way, envelope in hand, coat buttoned all the way up. It was Tuesday morning, crisp, ordinary. The kind of day no one expects a woman like me to do anything but sip weak coffee and feed birds. But I had different plans. The receptionist smiled politely, the same one from the will reading. She stood halfway up like she didn't know whether to greet me or prepare for something. I nodded, and she stepped aside. "He's in," she whispered. Of course he was. I didn't knock. I just opened the door. Charles Blanton, estate attorney for half the blue blood families in this side of the state, looked up like he'd seen a ghost. I didn't sit. I handed him the envelope. "I want it delivered by the end of the week," I said, "but not before Friday. And I want confirmation that it was hand-delivered to each of them. No email, no post." He opened the flap, scanned the first page, then looked up slowly. "You're serious?" "I've never been more serious in my life." He swallowed, adjusted his tie. "Helen, this will cause problems." "Good." I turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Charles." "Yes, they don't know about Caroline. Keep it that way." His face went pale. He'd read enough of the letter to see the name. He nodded. "Understood." I walked out and didn't look back. I didn't go home after that either. I stopped at the bank. The Ashcroft Family Trust was sizable, but most of it had been set aside for investments Richard curated through his own network. What Meredith didn't know, what she never bothered to understand, was that Richard and I had once built a fund before she came along. A quiet account under both our names, intended for future family matters. She thought family matters meant tuition or trusts. It didn't. It meant me. I requested a withdrawal that required 2 signatures. Mine was already on file. His had been pre-approved in 1998. The banker tried to tell me there'd be a processing delay. I told her I'd wait. 3 hours later, I walked out with certified documents and control over an account Meredith never dreamed existed. I stopped by a quiet cafe, ordered tea, sat by the window, and opened my notebook. I made a list. Not of revenge. Not really. Just restoration. I listed everything they'd taken. Little things. Peter's old sketchbooks, which Meredith had stored in their garage for space. The brass ashtray that had been my father's, and which Richard gave Peter, who then let Meredith redesign the den with. The photo albums. The piano. From Richard's mother. I listed every item that had been passed around and downgraded like garage sale leftovers. I wrote it all down. Then I made a second list. This one was for the things they didn't know they'd taken. The silence at dinners. The way Meredith interrupted me every time I tried to tell a story. The way she corrected Peter when he quoted me. The way she laughed when I mentioned the ranch. Always that same little scoff. Like I was quaint. The way Peter stopped calling me Mom and started saying Helen like I was a client. The way they talked around Caroline. Never about her. The way they erased her. Erased me. When I finished the second list, I looked at the names again. Meredith. Peter. And for the first time, I added a third name. Me. Because I let them. I let it happen. And that wasn't going to continue. Not one more day. By the end of the week, they'd each receive a letter. Personalized. Precise. Not cruel, but sharp. Like Richard said, it's not heavy, but it is sharp. Meredith's would include financial records she had no idea I had access to. Peter's would include photos of things he forgot he loved. And mine? Mine would stay with me, a reminder, a contract, a promise to myself that I wouldn't shrink again. I wouldn't fold. I wouldn't disappear into the polite wallpaper of someone else's story. They had turned me into a shadow, but I remembered now, shadows only exist because of light, and I was finally ready to stand in it. So when Friday came, I wore navy. Not black, not gray. Navy silk, tailored, deliberate. The same shade I wore the day Richard proposed. I took the letters to Charles myself. Watched his face as I handed him the folder. Deliver them. By hand. Today. He didn't argue. Just nodded, mouth tight. By noon, Meredith had hers. By 1, Peter had his. I didn't need to ask what their reactions were. I already knew. Peter would sit with it too long before understanding what it really meant. Meredith would skip straight to the parts she could weaponize, searching for loopholes, ways to spin it. But I hadn't left any. The terms were simple. The ranch was no longer family property. It was a private trust, sealed and passed into my sole control with no inheritance clause. The money from the account, already redirected, half to an art scholarship in Caroline's name, the rest to a series of quiet holdings Richard and I established before the children were born. Holdings Meredith had no claim to, though she'd certainly try. The items from my list, retrieved quietly, one by one. I hired a company, discreet, licensed, and legal. They knocked at Peter's door and explained what had been reclaimed. No shouting, no drama, just quiet inventory and signatures. The brass ashtray, the piano, the sketchbooks, gone from their house in a single afternoon. Meredith called me that night. I didn't answer. She left 3 voicemails. The first was confused. The second was angry. The third, I saved. "You think this makes you powerful," she hissed, her voice trembling. You think letters and trust funds make you relevant again? I didn't respond. Because I didn't need to be relevant. I already existed. And now she had to deal with that. Peter came to my house the next morning. He didn't knock right away. I watched him from the window, hands in his coat pockets, pacing the walk like a boy who didn't know whether he was in trouble or simply afraid of what he might hear. When I opened the door, he looked older than I remembered. Tired. Lost. Mom, he said. It broke me. Not the word. The way he said it, like it had been stuck behind his teeth for years. I didn't know, he whispered. I didn't know there was more. I stepped aside. Let him in. I didn't hug him. I didn't need to. We sat in the sunroom. I made tea. For a long time, he didn't say anything else. Just stared at the letters he brought with him. Mine. His. Meredith's. She's furious, he said finally. Good, I said. He laughed once, bitterly. You buried all this for decades. Why now? Because your father left me a map, and I was tired of pretending it didn't exist. Peter nodded. Then he said the one thing I didn't expect. Was there one for her? For Caroline? I didn't answer. I just handed him the photo. The one she had written home on. He stared at it like it would vanish in his hands. I could see the truth land in his chest. He remembered. She was only 2. But he remembered. She used to hum. He whispered. In the hallway. Before bedtime. His voice cracked. I thought I made that up. You didn't, I said. She did. He wiped his face with the back of his sleeve. No apology. No grand confession. Just grief. Raw and finally allowed to exist. When he left, he hugged me. Said he'd be back. I believed him this time. Not because he said it, but because he looked like a man who had just remembered his mother was still alive, and for the first time in decades. So did I that night. I sat on the same porch where Caroline once toddled in circles, her tiny hands gripping the rail as if it were a stage just for her. I watched the sky darken. No music, no voices, just the rhythm of my own breathing, steady now. The letters were delivered. The silence was broken. And yet, the peace I felt wasn't loud. It was soft, steady, earned. Peter didn't return that night, and I didn't expect him to. This wasn't about immediate resolution. It was about recognition, about letting the weight settle into their lives the way it had lived in mine for so long. I sat there long after the stars came out, holding the photo again, the one with all 4 of us, the way Caroline had written home on the back. Not a question, not a memory, but a declaration. I understood now. She wasn't marking a place. She was marking a truth. We had lost so much, but we had never really left each other. Not if we chose to remember. Not if we fought to protect what remained. I traced the faces in the photo one last time, then set it on the table beside me. Inside, the house waited, warm, quiet, full of light I had once let die. But tonight, it glowed again, not because of Richard, not because of Peter, but because I chose to light it. I closed the door behind me and turned the lock, not to keep them out, but to keep this moment in. Tomorrow could come, but tonight, I was home. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't slam a door. But in 3 letters, Helen rewrote the entire story they thought they controlled. And now that Peter remembers, Meredith's control is slipping. In part 4, the past Helen buried comes knocking, not in a letter, but in a voice she hasn't heard in 40 years. Part 4, the final letter. 3 days passed. No calls, no knocks, just peace. The kind of eerie calm that made even the birds outside hesitate before singing. I spent those days in rhythm, watering the same to plants, in the kitchen, folding already folded laundry, rereading the same passage in Richard's letter as if new meaning might bleed through. But on the fourth morning, the knock came, to slow raps. Not Peter, not Meredith. I opened the door slowly, and for the first time in 40 years, I saw her face, Caroline, or the shadow of her, a woman in her mid-40s, with my cheekbones, and Richard's eyes, standing in the doorway like she had been walking for decades just to make it here. My knees didn't buckle, my breath didn't hitch. I simply whispered, "Caroline." She blinked, swallowed. "My name is Lena," she said. "But I think you knew that." I nodded. Slowly, she looked past me, into the house. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. She didn't ask questions. She walked into the kitchen like it was hers. Like she had dreamed of it. She ran her hand along the edge of the table. I didn't know until last week. My parents, the ones who raised me, they told me I was adopted. Late, way too late. But they gave me this. She reached into her bag, pulled out a photograph. The same photograph I'd held on the porch. Only this one wasn't faded. It had been protected, kept safe. She flipped it over. There, in a child's handwriting, was the word home. I didn't cry. I just sat. She joined me, and we sat in silence, to strangers who had once been mother and daughter. "I don't know why they lied," she said, "but I kept dreaming about a tree with a burn on it. I looked it up, found the ranch, then I found the lawyer, and then I found you." I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. So instead, I stood, went to the side drawer, pulled out the last envelope, her envelope, the one I couldn't open. I handed it to her. She hesitated, then took it with both hands. Her eyes scanned the words slowly. Her fingers trembled, just like mine had. When she finished, she didn't speak. She reached out and took my hand. I didn't let go. I couldn't. That night, I made dinner, not because it was polite, but because that's what mothers do. We ate in the quiet hum of a house that finally remembered every name carved into its walls. Pete arrived just before sunset. He froze. In the doorway. "Lena," he said. Her lips quivered. "Peter." He walked to her like in a dream. No shouting, no disbelief, just recognition. Like his heart had kept a light on for her all these years. Meredith did not come. I didn't expect her to, and I didn't invite her. Some things are reclaimed. Some things are released. That night, we three sat in the living room, not as a perfect family, but as survivors of something none of us had language for. The photo lay on the coffee table between us, a silent witness to what we lost. And what, somehow, we still had. I didn't need to win. I didn't need to be right. I just needed this. Not justice, not vengeance, but return of memory, of voice, of name. I went to bed early, but I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the stars move above the ranch. I thought of Richard, and for once, I didn't feel anger. Just the echo of his voice saying, "You'll know what to do when it's time." He was right. I did. I reached for a pen, wrote one last letter, to no one, to everyone, folded it, labeled it for the porch. Then I stepped outside and left it there. A story doesn't end when the last page turns. It ends when you stop rewriting. yourself in someone else's version. And tonight, I finally wrote mine. Peter stayed the night, not because I asked him to, but because he couldn't bring himself to leave. He sat with Lena in the den until well past midnight, looking through old photo albums I had kept locked away, the ones Meredith said were too depressing to display. And Lena, she didn't cry when she saw herself as a baby. She just held the photos like they were warm, like they were proof she hadn't been erased. I stood in the doorway, unnoticed, and watched them rediscover each other, a brother and sister rebuilding a language that had been stolen from them. No theatrics, no dramatic reunion, just simple truths passing between them, one image at a time. The next morning, Lena asked to walk the land. I gave her Richard's old boots, still dusty, still his size, and watched her step into them like it was the most natural thing in the world. She wandered out toward the scarred tree, the one with the burn. She stood there for a long time. I didn't follow. That was her moment, her map, her memory. When she came back, she didn't say what she'd felt. She didn't need to. Her eyes held something new, something rooted. That afternoon, Peter found me on the porch, a cup of coffee in each hand. She's staying in town, he said, at least for a while. I nodded. Good. She asked about Meredith. I raised an eyebrow. What did you say? He looked at me for a long time, then shrugged. I told her Meredith's not part of this chapter. I smiled. Just a little. You always were the diplomatic one. Yeah, he said, but I'm done apologizing for things I didn't break. We sat in silence after that. A kind of peace that only comes when you've said the hard things. When you've let go. Meredith did try to reach out eventually. 3 voicemails, 2 emails, a letter sent through Charles. I didn't respond. What could she possibly say now? That she deserved a share. That she was confused. That she never meant harm. She'd had years to mean better. She chose not to. And now I chose not to answer. In the final week of summer, I changed the locks. I hired a painter, replanted the garden. I made space, real, physical space, for the people who still chose to show up. Peter, Lena, and sometimes even myself. I began writing again. Not letters, but essays, fragments of truth. Little pieces of a voice that had been buried too long beneath everyone else's version of events. Caroline, Lena, would sit at the kitchen table with her laptop, sometimes silent for hours, sometimes laughing at a memory I couldn't believe she recalled. Do you remember the music box? She asked once. The red one with chipped gold. I stared at her, stunned. Yes. You took it to bed every night. I dreamed of it. She whispered. 4 years. I thought I made it up. I opened the drawer beneath the china hutch, reached in, pulled it out. Still chipped. Still singing the same worn tune. When she wound it, she didn't cry. She just smiled. That night, I added one last name to the deed. Not out of guilt. Not out of ceremony, just truth. The ranch would belong to Lena when I was gone, and not because Richard wished it, but because I did, because she came back, because she looked me in the eye and called me Mom without hesitation, because sometimes what you lose returns, not to fix the past, but to build something new in spite of it. And I was finally ready to build. The morning of her last day on the ranch, Lena rose before the sun. I heard the creak of the screen door and saw her walk barefoot across the dew-wet grass, heading toward the old oak where Richard used to sit with the newspaper. I didn't follow. I just watched from the window as she knelt beside the roots and placed something in the soil. Later, I found it. The photograph. Ours. The one that had traveled through time, through lies, through loss. She had wrapped it in clear plastic, pressed it under a smooth stone, not to hide it, but to ground it, like a marker, like a truth finally given a home. We didn't say goodbye when she left. We said, next time. That was enough. Peter hugged me longer than usual that afternoon, held my shoulders like he finally saw the woman who'd raised him. You know, he said, she asked me if you were always this strong. I laughed. I wasn't. Well, he smiled. You are now. I stood on the porch long after. The truck disappeared down the road, the horizon soft with dust and late summer heat. I didn't feel empty. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt here, present, whole. No more pretending. No more waiting for Meredith to approve or for the world to remember I existed. No more swallowing silence so others could speak louder. Richard had left me a key, yes. But it wasn't to a vault. It was to myself, to the parts of me I'd buried so deep. Even I forgot the sound of my own certainty. And now, I heard it. Every step on this old wood floor. Every name spoken in this house. Every story returned to its rightful author. I sat down that evening with a fresh envelope. Addressed it simply, to whom she becomes. Inside, I placed the photograph, not the one of us as a family, the one I took yesterday, Lena beneath the tree, eyes closed, smiling into the wind. I sealed it, tucked it into the drawer marked someday, not because I needed to be remembered, but because I wanted the truth to keep breathing. The sky dimmed, the house sighed, and for the first time in my long, complicated life, I whispered aloud what I once feared to say. This is mine, my story, my ending. And it was. She didn't need to take back the ranch. She reclaimed herself. With every letter, every silence broken, Helen Ashcroft reminded us that age doesn't dim truth. It sharpens it. And when the past knocks, it's not always to haunt. Sometimes, it's to hand you the pen. If this story moved you, thanks for watching my original story. Stay with us. More true feeling stories are coming soon. Subscribe, share, and never let anyone rewrite your ending for you. Story complete. Thank you for listening.